This story is titled, My Wife Left for a Month with the Hot New Neighbor. I filed for divorce. She regretted it. But I'm not her second choice. I guess I just need to get this out of my system. My name's Mike. I'm 31. And for a long time, I thought I had my life figured out. Nothing flashy, nothing crazy. Just a regular guy with a steady job, a decent house, and what I believed was a solid marriage. Laura and I had been together for almost 8 years. When I think back to the day we met, it feels like a lifetime ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first real job, and still figuring out what adulthood even meant. Laura was 22, trying to find her way in the marketing world. We met at a friend's backyard barbecue, one of those casual get-togethers where everyone drinks cheap beer from red cups and someone always burns the burgers. She walked up to me, smirking, and said, "You look like you're plotting your escape." I don't remember what I said back, but I do remember that she laughed. And just like that, we talked the entire evening. Everything after that moved fast. We started dating, and she brought excitement into my otherwise predictable life. Laura was spontaneous, the type to drag me on random road trips or insist we try that new hole-in-the-wall restaurant that popped up overnight. Meanwhile, I was the practical one, the guy who checked the budget, planned the routes, and made sure we had enough gas before hitting the road. It worked, or at least I thought it did. 3 years in, we got married, nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony with family and close friends. We weren't rich, so there were no grand ballrooms or fancy honeymoon destinations, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that we had each other, or so I believed. We bought a little two-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Not the biggest place, but it was ours. I worked as a software developer, and Laura eventually decided to become a stay-at-home wife. She said she wanted to figure out what she truly wanted in life, and I supported her. Looking back, maybe I got too comfortable. It's easy to fall into a routine when things seem stable. Work, home, occasional date nights, rinse, and repeat. I stopped noticing the little things, like how much Laura thrived on attention. She had a way of lighting up a room, drawing people in effortlessly. I guess, over time, I started assuming that energy was something permanent between us, not something that needed to be nurtured. I should have paid more attention. Then Jake moved in. Jake was our new next-door neighbor, and from the moment he arrived, he turned heads. He was about 28, younger than most people in our neighborhood. A personal trainer, confident, and, if I'm being honest, way too good-looking for his own good. He had the kind of physique that made people do a double take, like he had just stepped out of a fitness magazine. And he made sure people noticed, always outside, washing his car, mowing the lawn, setting up a pull-up bar in his yard. There was always a reason for him to be shirtless. Laura noticed him immediately. How could she not? The first time we met Jake, he had walked over to introduce himself. It was a Saturday morning, and Laura and I were in the front yard, pulling weeds. He strolled up, flashed a perfect smile, and said, "Hey, I'm Jake. Just moved in next door." Laura practically lit up. She started asking him questions. Where he was from, what he did, how he liked the neighborhood. I stood there, nodding along, barely getting a word in. The two of them chatted like old friends. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Laura was friendly, outgoing. It was just her nature. But then the little things started happening. She'd casually mentioned seeing Jake outside when I got home from work. Then it turned into her spending more time in the front yard, conveniently whenever Jake was out there. At first, I brushed it off. But then, there was the gym. Laura suddenly got really into fitness. She had never been the type to care about working out before, but now she was at the gym almost every day. And guess who worked as a personal trainer at that exact gym? I told myself I was overthinking it, but deep down, I could feel something shifting. The thing about cracks in a relationship is that they don't show up all at once. They start small, almost invisible. But if you ignore them, they spread. And before you know it, everything you thought was solid starts to crumble. One evening, I came home to find Laura in the kitchen, humming to herself as she chopped vegetables. There was an energy about her that I hadn't seen in a long time. She was glowing. "Good day?" I asked, setting my bag down. She turned to me, smiling. "Yeah, I had a great workout. Jake pushed me really hard today." That was the first time she had said his name so casually, as if he had become a normal part of our daily conversations. I nodded, not wanting to overreact. "That's good. You should come sometime," she said, stirring the pan. "He's really great at what he does." I didn't know how to respond to that. A part of me wanted to say, "Why are you suddenly so interested in fitness?" But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to be the insecure husband. Still, something about the way she spoke about him left an uneasy feeling in my chest. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the thought. Was I just being paranoid, or was something actually happening? I had no idea that this was just the beginning. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Marriages go through phases, right? People find new hobbies, and sometimes they get excited about them. Maybe this was just Laura's way of adding something fresh to her life. But it wasn't just the gym. It was the way she talked about Jake. The way she started dressing differently. Leggings, fitted tops, new sports bras. Like she suddenly cared about looking good at the gym. It was the way she kept her phone angled away from me when she texted, smirking at whatever was on the screen. And then the late nights started. At first, it was her staying after workouts to chat with the girls. Then it turned into her grabbing smoothies or sitting in the sauna. I didn't question it much at first. But then, one night, she didn't come home until nearly 11. She walked in, breathless, hair damp like she had just showered. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down like nothing was wrong. I glanced at the clock. "You were at the gym this whole time?" She hesitated for a second. "Yeah, I lost track of time." I frowned. "Your gym closes at 10. Her lips parted slightly, but she recovered fast. "Yeah, I know." A few of us grabbed smoothies after. She gave me a look like I was overreacting. "You don't mind, do you?" I forced a smile. "No, of course not." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. The next time she came home late, I asked casually who she had been hanging out with. She rattled off a few names, none of which I had ever heard her mention before. I started paying attention, and one evening I left work early and drove by the gym, just to see if she was actually there. Her car was parked outside, so I sat there for a while, waiting, feeling ridiculous. Maybe she really was just working out. Then I saw him. Jake walked out first, followed by Laura. They were laughing about something, her hand resting on his arm before she pulled away. He leaned in to say something, and she smiled, this warm, genuine smile I hadn't seen in a long time. She didn't check her phone, which meant she wasn't planning to text me that she was done yet. I gripped the steering wheel. I could have confronted her right then and there, but I didn't. I wanted to see how far she would take this. So I went home and waited. She walked in 2 hours later. "Hey, babe," she called from the hallway. "I'm starving. You eat already?" I stayed seated on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone. "Yeah," I said casually. "How was your workout?" She came into the living room, stretching her arms like she was exhausted. "Good. Tough, but good." That was it. No mention of Jake. No mention of staying after. I nodded, keeping my voice even. "That's great." She walked into the kitchen, humming to herself, like nothing had happened. A few days later, I tested something. I asked her if she wanted to go on a weekend trip, just the two of us. A little getaway, something we hadn't done in a while. She hesitated. "Maybe another time," she said. "I've got a lot going on right now." I laughed a little. "Laura, you don't have a job. What's keeping you so busy?" Her eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" I held my hands up. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant we haven't spent much time together lately." She softened slightly, but she still seemed reluctant. "I know. I've just been in a good groove at the gym, you know?" I nodded, but didn't press further. Later that night, I woke up in the middle of the night and reached for her, but her side of the bed was empty. I got up and walked through the house, checking the bathroom, the kitchen. Then I saw the faint glow from the living room. She was curled up on the couch, her phone in her hand, the light illuminating her face. She didn't hear me at first. "Everything okay?" I asked. She startled, locking her phone in one quick motion. "Yeah, fine, just couldn't sleep." I stared at her. "Who were you texting?" She shrugged. "Just some friends from the gym." Something about the way she said it put me on edge. The next day, I decided I needed to be sure. On my lunch break, I drove to her gym and walked inside. I had no real plan, just an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. I spotted one of the front desk staff, a woman I had seen before when Laura first signed up. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "My wife comes here all the time." "Laura?" She smiled. "Oh yeah, Laura. She's been making great progress." I nodded. "Yeah, she loves it. I was just wondering, does she usually work out alone?" The woman hesitated, glancing away. "Well, she trains with Jake a lot." "Right, just training?" She let out a small laugh. "I mean, you know how it is. Everyone talks, flirts a little. It's a gym." "Flirts." I forced a smile. "Of course, thanks." I walked out, my stomach twisting. That night, when Laura came home, I decided to test her one last time. "You and Jake seem pretty close," I said casually as we ate dinner. She didn't even blink. "Yeah, he's a great trainer." That was the moment I knew she was lying to me. At this point, I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I already knew. I was just waiting for the moment she'd slip up, the moment she'd stop covering her tracks so well. And that moment came sooner than I expected. One Friday night, Laura told me she was going to a gym group dinner. Nothing fancy, just some people from her workout crew grabbing a meal together. I acted normal, told her to have fun, and even joked that she shouldn't let them rope her into ordering kale smoothies instead of real food. She laughed and kissed my cheek before heading out. An hour later, I decided to check. Not because I wanted to catch her, I just needed to confirm what I already knew. I drove past the restaurant she had mentioned. I saw a group of people inside, a mix of guys and girls in gym clothes, but Laura wasn't there. I parked across the street and sat there, feeling my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My mind was already racing with possibilities. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she had just stepped outside. Or maybe she wasn't coming at all. I took a deep breath and called her. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and casual. Hey, babe, what's up? Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just wanted to see how dinner was going. Oh, it's great. We just ordered. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Nice. What did you get? There was a slight pause. Just a salad. I stared at the restaurant, at the group of people sitting inside, laughing and chatting. If Laura was just ordering, why wasn't she here? That's good, I said slowly. Who's all there? She hesitated again, but only for a split second. Oh, the usual. Some of the girls. A couple of the trainers. Jake's here too. My stomach twisted. Sounds fun, I said, keeping my voice light. Send me a picture. I want to see what you guys are up to. Another pause. Oh, my phone's about to die, she said quickly. I'll send you one later, okay? She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat there in my car, gripping the phone in my hand. She was lying. I knew she was lying. But where was she? I took a guess. I drove straight to Jake's apartment. I had only been there once, when he first moved in and invited a few neighbors over for drinks. It was in one of those newer complexes with gated parking, but I knew there was a side entrance that didn't require a key fob. I parked a block away and walked up, my hands clenched at my sides. I had no plan. I didn't even know what I was going to do if I actually found her there. But then as I turned the corner, I saw it. Laura's car, parked right outside Jake's building. I felt everything inside me go numb. I walked up to the door, my footsteps sounding too loud in my own ears. My hands felt shaky, but I knocked anyway. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside, whispering, footsteps. The door opened just a crack, and Jake stood there, shirtless, looking like he had just been caught sneaking out of a crime scene. Hey, man, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like this was just some awkward misunderstanding. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, and there she was, Laura, sitting on his couch, wearing one of his oversized t-shirts, her hair still damp from a shower. She froze when she saw me, her face draining of color. Mike, she started. I held up a hand. Don't. Silence. Jake stepped back, avoiding my eyes. Look, man, I turned and walked out. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't need to. The proof was right there. I got in my car and drove home. She didn't follow me. She didn't even call. I don't remember much of that night. I sat in the dark for hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. I had always thought that if something like this ever happened, I'd be furious, that I'd yell, demand answers, break something. But I didn't. I just felt empty. The next morning, she finally came home. She walked in quietly, her face pale, her eyes red. Mike, pack your stuff, I said, cutting her off. We're done. She blinked at me, like she hadn't expected it to be this easy, like she thought I'd argue or beg or at least ask her why. But I already knew why. She hesitated. Can we just? No. She stared at me for a long time. Then without another word, she turned and walked into the bedroom. I sat there, listening to the sound of her packing, of drawers opening and closing, of zippers being pulled shut. Then finally, the front door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, 8 years of my life were gone. Update 1. Laura was gone, but she still lingered in every corner of the house. Her scent was faint on the pillows, her hair ties still sat in the bathroom drawer, and I kept finding little reminders of her. Half-burned candles, a sweater she left draped over the back of a chair, a pair of shoes by the door like she might walk in any second and slip them on. The house had never felt this quiet before. It wasn't just the lack of her voice or the absence of her humming in the kitchen. It was the weight of it all. The realization that for the first time in 8 years, I was truly alone. At first, I kept moving on autopilot. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. I told myself this was for the best. No more waiting up at night, no more excuses, no more pretending things were fine. I had spent months living with the sinking feeling that something was wrong, and now at least I knew. There was no more doubt. But the thing about knowing is that it doesn't make the hurt disappear. It just makes it sharper. She called 2 days after she left. I saw her name flash across my screen and let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then came the texts. Nothing long, just short, careful messages, as if she was testing the waters. She asked if we could talk, if I could just hear her out. She told me she was sorry, that she missed me. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't respond. She had all the time in the world to talk before. She could have told me when she felt like something was missing, when she started pulling away, when she let Jake slip into the space between us. But she didn't. Instead, she let me sit in the dark while she found excitement somewhere else. And now suddenly she wanted to talk? 3 days later, she showed up at the house. The knock was soft, hesitant. I thought about ignoring it, but some part of me needed to see her face, needed to see if she'd even have the guts to look me in the eye. She stood on the porch looking small, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to make herself disappear. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she wore an old sweatshirt, one I recognized as mine. A cheap trick, making herself look fragile and familiar, like that would somehow soften what she had done. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. She said she was sorry, that she never meant for things to happen the way they did. She said she didn't even know why she had done it, that she had felt confused, lost. She had spent months lying to my face, sneaking around, making excuses. Now she wanted me to believe she just didn't know why. Then she said she missed me, that she made a mistake, that she still loved me. Love isn't something you gamble with. It isn't something you set aside for a thrill and expect to pick back up when it's convenient. If she loved me, she wouldn't have lied. She wouldn't have made me feel like I was crazy for noticing the changes in her, for wondering why she was spending so much time with another man. She wouldn't have walked into Jake's apartment like it was hers, like she belonged there more than she did here. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, maybe hoping for some sign that I'd soften, that I'd be willing to hear her out. She said she wasn't living with Jake, that she had been staying with her sister. She said she wasn't happy, that being away made her realize what she had lost. She asked if I could just give her a chance to fix things. There was nothing left to fix. She must have realized it then, because her shoulders slumped. And for the first time since she walked back into my life, she didn't try to argue. She wiped her face, nodded, and turned to leave. I watched her walk down the driveway, listened to the sound of her car pulling away. I waited to feel something, anger, sadness, regret, but there was nothing, just relief. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months. No more waiting for the door to open late at night, no more lying awake, wondering if she was where she said she was. The next morning I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The weight of everything pressed down on me, but instead of breaking me, it lifted. She was gone, and for the first time in a long time I felt free. The first week after Laura left felt unreal. The house was too quiet. It wasn't just the lack of her voice or the absence of her footsteps in the hallway. It was the weight of the silence itself. I'd never noticed how much space another person could take up in a home until she was gone. Mornings were the worst. I would wake up instinctively reaching for the other side of the bed, only to find it cold and empty. It was a habit I didn't even realize I had. Muscle memory that hadn't caught up to reality. Her pillow still had an indentation from where she used to sleep, and even though I knew I should flip it over, I left it that way for a few days. The kitchen still smelled like her perfume, faint but persistent. The scent clung to the fabric of the couch where she used to sit with her legs curled up, scrolling through her phone. Her coffee mug was still in the cabinet, untouched. Her favorite blanket was draped over the chair in the living room, as if she might walk in at any second, wrap herself in it, and settle in for the night. I thought about packing up her things right away, but I didn't. It felt too final, too much like admitting that this was real. So instead, I focused on keeping myself busy. Work became my escape. I started staying late, volunteering for projects I wouldn't normally take on. I told myself it was because I wanted to be productive, but in reality, I was just trying to avoid coming home to an empty house. My coworkers noticed the change. Some asked if I was okay. A few suggested grabbing a drink after work. I told them I was fine. They didn't believe me, but they didn't push. Evenings were the hardest. There was nothing to distract me then. I tried watching TV, but every show reminded me of something we used to watch together. I switched to music, but even that wasn't safe. Every playlist had at least one song that brought back a memory I didn't want to think about. Then the messages started. Laura had stopped texting for a few days after she showed up at the house, maybe hoping I'd be the one to reach out first. When I didn't, she tried again. The first message was cautious, as if she wasn't sure if I'd even read it. She said she hoped I was okay. I ignored it. The next day, another message. She said she missed me, that she had been thinking about everything and realized how much she had ruined. Then came a longer one. She told me she wasn't doing well, that she felt like she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She said she couldn't stop thinking about me, about us. She wanted to talk, to meet somewhere, just once. I stared at the message for a long time. She hadn't felt this way when she was sneaking around, lying to my face. She hadn't felt this way when she was spending hours with Jake, pretending everything between us was fine. She only missed me now because she had lost me. I typed out a response, then deleted it. There was nothing to say. A few days later, a mutual friend reached out. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. They asked if I'd talked to Laura recently. When I said no, they hesitated, then let out a small laugh. Apparently, things between her and Jake weren't as perfect as she had imagined. The excitement, the thrill, the secrecy, once that was gone, there was nothing left. Reality had set in, and it wasn't as glamorous as she had expected. She had thrown everything away for him, and now it was falling apart. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even smug, but I didn't. I just felt done. One night, I finally decided it was time. I walked through the house, gathering the last of her things. The sweater, the mug, the half-used shampoo in the bathroom. It was strange how small the pile was in the end. 8 years together, and all that was left of her presence in my life fit into a single cardboard box. I didn't overthink it. I drove to a donation center, handed the box over without hesitation, and walked away. She wasn't coming back, and I didn't want her to. When I got home, I took a deep breath and looked around. The house still felt different, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. I rearranged the furniture just enough to make the space feel new. It was a small change, but it made a difference. That night, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night, without the weight of wondering where she was. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. The first real sign that I was moving forward came unexpectedly. It had been a few weeks since I packed up Laura's things, and the house was finally starting to feel like mine. The silence wasn't as loud anymore. I was getting used to the extra space, the freedom of not waiting for someone to come home late or pretending not to care when she did. At first, the free time felt unnatural. For years, my schedule had been tied to another person's habits, waiting for her to be ready before heading out, planning weekends around her interests, adjusting my evenings based on her moods. Now, for the first time in nearly a decade, I could do whatever I wanted. The problem was, I wasn't sure what that was. One evening after work, I found myself driving without a destination. I used to love aimless drives, rolling the windows down, playing music without a care in the world. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped doing that. I had stopped doing a lot of things. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a bar I used to go to before I met Laura. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet spot with good food and a bartender who actually remembered people's names. I had avoided it for a while because Laura and I had been there together too many times. But that night, I realized something. It wasn't our place. It was mine before she ever came into the picture. I walked in, grabbed a seat at the counter, and ordered a drink. The bartender recognized me immediately. He leaned in and said it had been a while, asked how things were going. I just nodded and told him I'd been busy. He didn't press. Instead, he slid my drink over and moved on to the next customer, giving me space to sit and think. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Laura. I wasn't wondering where she was, what she was doing, or if she was still regretting what she had done. I wasn't even thinking about Jake. I was just existing, and it felt good. Over the next few weeks, I started to reclaim little parts of myself that I hadn't even realized I had lost. I picked up old hobbies again, things I had set aside because Laura either wasn't interested or had made me feel like they weren't important. I started reading again, something I used to love but had stopped because it didn't fit into our routine. I went back to the gym, not because I felt like I had to prove anything, but because it felt good to push myself. Friends started reaching out more, probably noticing that I was finally pulling myself out of whatever hole I had been in. At first, I turned down invitations, still feeling like I wasn't fully ready to be social again. But eventually, I gave in. I met up with an old friend for lunch, then another for a drink after work. Slowly, life started feeling normal again. One night, I was out with a few friends when someone new joined the group. She was a friend of a friend, introduced casually over drinks. She had a warm laugh and an easygoing way about her, the kind of energy that didn't feel forced. At one point in the conversation, she turned to me and asked how I knew everyone. Without thinking, I told her a quick version of the truth. I had just gone through a breakup, and I was reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in a while. She tilted her head, studying me for a second, then just nodded. She didn't ask for details, didn't press for some dramatic story. She just smiled and said that was good, that it was nice to have a solid group of friends to lean on. And that was it. No pity, no awkwardness, just a normal conversation. I had spent so much time feeling like my breakup was this massive thing that defined me, like I was walking around with a giant sign that said betrayed and recovering. But in that moment, I realized something. It was just a part of my story, not the whole thing. I wasn't just the guy who got cheated on. I was someone who was moving forward, figuring things out, and finding pieces of himself again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. A few months had passed, and life felt different. Not just because Laura was gone, but because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of what happened. The pain that had once felt like a constant presence had faded into something else. Just a memory. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head, wondering where things had gone wrong. I wasn't waiting for another message from her, expecting one last apology or explanation. I had moved on. The biggest sign of that was when I finally stopped caring about whether she and Jake were still together. At first, I had been curious, checking social media or waiting for someone to casually mention it in conversation. But eventually, it just didn't matter. Whether they were happy, miserable, or had already gone their separate ways, it had nothing to do with me anymore. One afternoon, I got a text from an old coworker asking if I wanted to come to a small get-together. Nothing big, just a few friends grilling in someone's backyard. A few months ago, I would have said no. I would have made up some excuse, told myself I wasn't in the mood. But now I found myself saying yes without hesitation. When I arrived, I was greeted with a cold beer and a few familiar faces. The atmosphere was light, full of laughter and easy conversations. It had been a long time since I felt that kind of comfort, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. At some point in the evening, I ended up talking to someone new. She was standing near the grill, debating whether or not to take another plate of food. When I joked that the extra calories didn't count at barbecues, she laughed and agreed, piling more onto her plate. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything and nothing. Movies we both liked, places we had traveled, the best food spots in town. She had a way of making every topic seem interesting, of pulling people in without even trying. At one point, she asked if I lived nearby. I told her I did, that I had been in the area for a while. I almost mentioned Laura out of habit, the way I used to when talking about where I lived. But then I realized I didn't need to. This was my life now. She smiled and said she liked the neighborhood. Before we left that night, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I said yes. It wasn't anything serious. I wasn't looking for anything serious. But it felt good to say yes, to something new, to something unknown. Driving home that night, I realized just how far I had come. For so long, I had been focused on what I lost, on the betrayal, on the unfairness of it all. I had wasted so much energy thinking about the past, about Laura, about the way things ended. But now I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about what was ahead. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something I had to rebuild from the ground up. It just felt open, and I was ready for it.